There is a systemology to the way in which he analyses politics and economics, which I think has been deeply shaped by Marxist pedagogy.
Okay.
And unlike you, I don't think Marxism-Leninism is without, shall I say, a level of intellectual sophistication. I think it does. I don't agree with it. That's a separate matter. But as an elaborate worldview and as a systemology for understanding your place in history, historical materialism, and how you advance the cause, dialectical materialism, and Leninism being the particular vehicle of the moment, the party, frankly, it coheres, at least in their thinking. This is not a basis for expounding a set of principles which are going to win you 1,000 votes out there in the villages in Heilongjiang South. Not going to do that. But I'm simply seeking to explain this as a means of informing how he constructs his worldview.
We've got this now. So now we have this cognitive analytical framework of dialectical materialism. We have this this strict adherence to Leninism, this insistence of the party in control of everything. We talk all the time.
And a Carlylean view of history, right, of great men. Put all that together. And we still don't have something that I would call an ideology. So we still have something that is an empty vessel. And what is in it now? I mean, we always talk about the triumph of ideology now over pragmatism. We talk all the time about, in this time, the reassertion of the Reds over the experts. I'm still unsatisfied with the way that people, when I've asked them, have told me about what the positive content of ideology actually is. Is it not much more than Chinese nationalism gussied up with a little, Confucianism and then just some paeans to so whatever is conveniently drawn from Marxism? I don't feel like there's... No, but when I've spoken just now about Marxism-Leninism, I'm not talking about an ideology which is designed to cohere the Chinese nation. I'm simply talking about the intellectual software of the leadership elite.
Sure.
So to answer your question...
I think that maybe an operating system, but still there's what are the programs that it's running?
No, that's true. So beyond the intellectual software of the leadership and on to, let's call it the answer to the decline of Marxism as a basis for mass belief, and in the absence of a guojiao, a national religion, then what the hell do you do?
Right.
And your depiction before of nationalism with gussied up is not wildly inaccurate. My favorite pastime when I go to China is to see how that little girl in the Zhongguo Meng series of propaganda posters is traveling as her mission statement expands into new forms of calligraphy and painting, respect for elders, and the rest. And you'll notice that most of it, a bit like the opening of the Beijing Olympics, it's got nothing to do with the party. It's everything to do with an incorporation and therefore a harnessing of the positive narratives of Chinese history as told through the party's historiography, plus enduring Chinese hierarchical values leavened out of the Confucian loaf with not a lot of Taoism or Buddhism on the way through.
It probably bears mention that this is not the only country in the world that does this, that cherry picks its history.
Zut alors.
Right.
Are you referring to the world's oldest democracy?
Well, that one, I mean, and this one.
No, isn't that the self-description of the United States?
Sure. We are the old, I suppose we are. I mean,
No, that's part of the national. That's part of the national mythology of the United States. It's not the world's oldest democracy.
So, as I think you may be the first Xi Jinpingologist who I've encountered.
Oh no, there's I think a good and useful book on Xi Jinping recently is put together by Liz Economy of the CFR, and given that the subject is opaque, all of us who seek through some scholarship to shed some light on this subject. I think have a contribution to make until the picture becomes clearer.
We talked about this phrase, leading the reform of global governance. What do you take that to mean? Do you think he has something specific in mind? I mean, does he mean upending, supplanting, or just supplementing the Bretton Woods institutions? Does he? What does he mean by that? It's a vague claim. Is it the ITU, other standard-setting bodies, in technology?
Yes, the wonderful thing about Chinese global statecraft and national statecraft to some extent is that bold statements usually precede detailed blueprints. 改革开放, Deng Xiaoping. 一带一路, One Belt, One Road.
Sure.
I mean, that caught the entire Chinese system by surprise. And we had a 5-year catch-up by the Chinese bureaucracy to sew that into a coherent mass to the extent that it has been so far. Similarly with this question of the reform of global governance. So I think the way in which Chinese political and bureaucratic leadership works is that we get to a stage where the leader pronounces that we shall do this, and a whole bunch of activity then ensues as people seek to execute the new fangzhen or direction. And then a subsequent review process, usually several years down the track, occurs as people come back and report on what the 具体的做法, concrete methods, have produced in executing this fangzhen or direction. And then it becomes more refined.
This was called working toward the Führer in another context.
So therefore, we are sometimes guilty of underestimating what China does. And so therefore I take these fundamental linguistic changes in national political and international policy direction seriously, because the way the system works is it commands a new bunch of activity. We sometimes overestimate it in the sense of the detailed nature of the blueprint at a particular time. But if you're sitting in the UN, for example, or in the Bretton Woods institutions over the last 5 years, you know that something new has happened. Chinese diplomats are more activist. There are now a bunch more Chinese, as it were, free-willing diplomatic initiatives to solve problem X, problem Y, problem Z. You know that there is a greater predisposition for China to seek appointments to UN or international bodies around the world. You know that China's posture within the UN Security Council is no longer simply playing the role of Lao Er to Lao Su or Lao to the Russians in the Security Council, and that the Russians are pausing more to see which way China will go on key questions. So we need to be very clear in observing these changes, while not assuming that there is a 97-point plan lying in the bowels of the policy planning department of the MFA, covering every single international agency. But the broad contours of more activism, more presence of personnel, and I think, as I may have reflected in earlier speeches, a rolling effort by our Chinese friends to change the culture, the operating culture of a number of international institutions over time, always de facto rather than de jure.
Right. That leads well into the next question I have for you, which is, how does China see this particular historical moment? That is, how does she see this particular moment? I mean, they look out onto the world. They see a West now that's really in the grips of this populist nativist insurgency. Essentially, they see a nation, this leading nation, sort of frittering away its energies in internecine, political wrangling. I mean, I keep thinking about in biology how an organism it has to optimize for it's how it uses its energy. And this doesn't look like a very successful organism in that way, frittering away so much of it in just this sort of internal political war, civil war. The commitments of the United States to the rule-based order are now very much in question to its allies regionally, globally. They're very much and really the very foundations on which the entire Enlightenment project has been built are now sort of under siege by, under this Trumpian assault. I mean, Chaz Freeman called him Captain Havoc, and I think that's true. I mean, it's science, it's reason, it's pluralism. These things are frightfully under siege. And how does Beijing see then this moment? I mean, do they see this is our time? This is the moment to strike?
Yeah, I've begun to think about this over recent years, and the place where all sinologists go to give speeches on these subjects is Madrid. Not really. I mean, I just went to a conference in Madrid a couple of years ago now to speak on this subject of the future of the West. And it's not that Madrid or Spain was a particular center of the Enlightenment. In fact,
it skipped the Enlightenment entirely, right?
Given the centrality of the Catholic Church and Spain's role in the Counter-Reformation and the Counter-Enlightenment. But no, what I was seeking to speak on was a reflection about where we are, that is, as a Western tradition. Products of, let's call it, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, democratic franchise, the rise of liberal capitalism, and the associated freedoms associated that were incorporated with all the above, producing in turn, in the wealth of the post-war period,